They say patience is power, and for 6 long years I mastered the art of invisibility, while my wife Rebecca and her social circle saw me as nothing but a failed entrepreneur. None of them realized they were all working for the very company I secretly built. That night, as I watched them mock my latest unemployment streak over expensive wine I had paid for, I knew their time was finally running out. I sat quietly at the edge of our designer sofa, nursing a glass of sparkling water, while the sound of laughter echoed through our modern penthouse apartment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The city lights twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating an almost theatrical backdrop for the scene unfolding before me. Rebecca, my wife of 5 years, was hosting another one of her infamous dinner parties, surrounded by her usual entourage of corporate executives. She sat there, perfectly poised in her crimson designer dress, the one I had secretly funded through one of my many private accounts. Her diamond bracelet caught the light as she gestured dramatically, launching into yet another story about her supposedly hopeless husband. Everything about her exuded success: the perfectly styled hair, the manicured nails, the air of someone who believed they had life figured out. The irony of it all almost made me smile. "James, darling," she called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "why don't you tell everyone about your latest entrepreneurial venture?" The way she said entrepreneurial made it sound like a child's make-believe game. She adjusted her posture, preparing herself for what had become her favorite form of entertainment: my public humiliation, her best. Friend Victoria, the current marketing director at Nexus Technologies, my company, leaned forward with practiced interest, her Chanel perfume heavy in the air. "Oh yes, James, do tell. Was this the cryptocurrency thing or the mobile app idea?" She shared a knowing look with Rebecca, both of them barely containing their amusement. I forced a weak smile, playing my part perfectly. "Actually, I've been exploring opportunities in digital transformation consulting." The words came out softly, almost apologetically, exactly as they expected them to. I watched as they exchanged glances, their eyes gleaming with barely contained mockery. The room erupted in poorly concealed snickers. David, our chief financial officer, though he had no idea I was really his boss, nearly choked on his wine. "Digital transformation. That's quite ambitious for someone who—" He paused, searching for diplomatic words. "Hasn't quite found their footing yet." His wife Sarah patted his arm appreciatively, as if he'd just delivered a clever joke at a comedy club. Rebecca shot me a look that mixed pity with embarrassment. "James has always had interesting ideas," she said, swirling her wineglass. "Remember last month when he thought he could land a contract with Turner Industries?" She turned to the group, eager to share another tale of my supposed incompetence. What Rebecca didn't know was that I owned Turner Industries through a holding company, and that failed interview she loved to mock was actually my quarterly undercover assessment of our partnership potential. The contract she thought I lost had been signed yesterday, worth $50 million. The document sat in my private office, along with other papers that would soon change everything. "At least he's persistent," Victoria chimed in, her voice thick with condescension. "Though maybe it's time to consider something more realistic. We're actually hiring in the mailroom at Nexus." She smoothed her designer skirt, paid for by the very company she thought she was offering me entry-level work at. More laughter. Even Rebecca's new friend Claire, who barely knew me, joined in. "My husband's company is always looking for warehouse workers," she offered, as if throwing a lifeline to a drowning man. "There's no shame in honest work, James." I took another sip of my water, letting the cool liquid wash away the words I wanted to say. Through the corner of my eye, I caught Rebecca's slight headshake, the one she thought I didn't notice, the one that said, "I can't believe I married this." The same headshake she'd been giving for years, each time more dismissive than the last. The irony was delicious. Every person in this room worked for me. Every paycheck they bragged about, every bonus they flaunted, every corporate achievement they prided themselves on, it all came from the company I had built from nothing. Nexus Technologies, now valued at over $2 billion, was my creation, my empire, hidden behind layers of holding companies and careful corporate structuring. Tomorrow at exactly 9 a.m., their perfectly curated world would shatter. But for now, I sat, quietly, playing the role of the unsuccessful husband, the startup failure, the subject of their jokes. Let them laugh, I thought. In less than 24 hours, the same people who mockingly offered me entry-level positions would be reading their termination letters in my boardroom. "James," Rebecca called out again, "be a dear and open another bottle of the Bordeaux. It's the least you can do since we're all celebrating Victoria's promotion." She smiled at her friend, both of them sharing a knowing look, completely unaware that the promotion papers sitting on Victoria's desk would never be signed. If they only knew that promotion would never come. I stood up, heading to our wine cellar, my steps unhurried, measured. Behind me, their laughter continued, but all I could hear was the ticking clock, counting down to their reckoning. As I descended the stairs to the wine cellar, I allowed myself a small smile. Just a few more hours of playing the fool, and then everything would change. The wine cellar's soft lighting cast long shadows as I selected a bottle of 1982 Chateau Lafite Rothschild, a $5,000 wine Rebecca believed she'd purchased with her executive bonus. In reality, it was part of my private collection, each bottle carefully chosen to maintain our facade of her success. As I gripped the bottle's neck, memories of this morning's executive meeting flooded back. I had sat there, disguised as a maintenance worker, watching Victoria present her latest marketing strategy. The same Victoria who now sat upstairs mocking my career choices had completely butchered the presentation, proposing a campaign that would have cost Nexus Technologies millions in potential revenue. Yet she stood there, confident and arrogant, dismissing concerns from junior staff members with the same condescending tone she used with me. Making my way back upstairs, I caught the tail end of what must have been another joke at my expense. Rebecca's laughter, sharp and theatrical, cut through the air. "Oh God, you should have seen him at the investor meetup last week. He actually thought he could convince them to fund his revolutionary software platform." David, already on his fourth glass of wine, leaned forward eagerly. "Don't tell me another rejection." His words slightly slurred, but his mockery remained precise. "He didn't even make it past the reception desk," Rebecca continued, her eyes glinting with malicious amusement. The secretary took one look at his proposal and suggested he try the Small Business Administration instead. More laughter erupted. What they didn't know was that the investor meetup had been at one of my subsidiary companies. The receptionist, Sarah, was actually my head of investor relations, playing along with our carefully orchestrated charade. The rejection had been a cover for a $100 million acquisition deal I'd finalized that afternoon. "Here's the wine," I now said quietly, placing the bottle on the marble coffee table. Victoria immediately reached for it, examining the label with exaggerated expertise. "Oh, Rebecca, darling, this is exquisite," she cooed. "The 82 Lafite. You really know how to celebrate." She shot me a sideways glance. "Though I suppose when one of us has to be the breadwinner," Rebecca preened under the praise, "well, someone has to maintain our lifestyle. God knows James isn't going to do it with his endless string of failed ventures." She turned to me, her voice honey-sweet but laced with venom. "Sweetheart, why don't you tell everyone about your latest rejection email? The one from Phoenix Digital?" My stomach tightened, not from embarrassment, but from controlled anger. Phoenix Digital was another company I owned, and the rejection email had been crafted by my team to maintain my cover. I forced my face to flush. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Playing the part of the humiliated husband perfectly. "I'd rather not discuss it," I mumbled, exactly as they expected me to. Claire, eager to join the feeding frenzy, jumped in. "You know, James, my 16-year-old nephew just started learning coding. Maybe he could give you some tips." The room dissolved into laughter again. I watched as Rebecca basked in the attention, her perfectly manicured hand resting on Victoria's arm as they shared another knowing look. These weekly dinner parties had become her stage, and I was her favorite prop, the unsuccessful husband she so nobly supported. "Remember when he tried to pitch to Anderson Corp last year?" David interjected, clearly enjoying himself. God, what a disaster that must have been. Rebecca's eyes lit up at the memory. "Oh, you don't know the half of it. He spent weeks preparing, bought a new suit and everything." She paused for dramatic effect. They didn't even let him finish his presentation. The CEO practically laughed him out of the building. The truth? I owned Anderson Corp through a shell company, and that meeting had been my quarterly review of the management team's treatment of potential partners. The CEO had been fired the next day for his unprofessional behavior, though the real reason never made it to the press. As the night wore on, the wine flowed freely, and their inhibitions lowered further. Each story became more elaborate, each laugh more cutting. I sat there playing my part, offering weak smiles and awkward silences, exactly when they expected them. "James," Rebecca called out again, her voice carrying that familiar note of public sympathy that barely masked her disdain. "Why don't you go check if we have any more of those chocolate truffles left? The ones I brought back from my Paris business trip." The Paris trip, another piece of carefully crafted fiction. The truffles, like everything else in our luxury apartment, had been purchased with my money through one of the many accounts Rebecca knew nothing about. As I stood to fetch them, Victoria's voice followed me to the kitchen. "Really, Rebecca, you're a saint for putting up with all this." "I don't know how you do it." I opened the kitchen cabinet, retrieving the gold-embossed box of truffles, my hands steady, despite the anger simmering beneath my calm exterior. In less than 12 hours, their perfectly constructed world would come crashing down. Let them have their laughs tonight. Tomorrow, the real show would begin. As I arranged the truffles on a crystal platter, another item Rebecca believed she'd purchased with her year-end bonus. My mind drifted back to the moment that set this entire plan in motion. 6 years ago, I wasn't just James the failure. I was James Chen, a brilliant software developer with a vision that would revolutionize supply chain management. Back then, I worked at one of the largest tech companies in the country, leading their innovation department. I had everything: respect, recognition, and a corner office with a view of the San Francisco Bay. But I also had something else, an idea that would change the industry forever. I'd spent years developing an AI-driven platform that could predict and optimize supply chain disruptions before they occurred. When I presented my idea to the board, they didn't just reject it, they tried to steal it. I discovered their plans to patent my technology under the company's name, cutting me out entirely. The betrayal was swift and brutal. Within weeks, I was forced out on trumped-up charges of corporate espionage, my reputation in tatters. That's when I learned my first real lesson about power. It's not about who you are. It's about who people think you are. I retreated to a small apartment in Oakland, living off my savings while I plotted my next move. The tech community had blacklisted me, believing the lies spread by my former employers. Every door seemed closed, except one. If they wanted to see me as a failure, I'd use that perception to my advantage. During those early days, I met Rebecca at a tech conference where I was working as a volunteer, playing the part of a struggling entrepreneur. She was there representing her company, radiating confidence and ambition. What caught my attention wasn't her beauty or her charm, it was the way she treated people she deemed beneath her. I watched as she dismissed service staff, belittled junior employees, and networked aggressively with anyone she thought could advance her career. She was the perfect embodiment of the corporate culture I despised, yet she represented an unexpected opportunity. "You have potential," she told me on our third date, her voice dripping with condescension. "You just need someone to guide you." Little did she know I was already building Nexus Technologies through a complex web of shell companies and silent partnerships. The early days of Nexus were grueling. I worked through nights in my office, a converted storage room in our first apartment, while Rebecca thought I was tinkering with another hopeless startup. Every failure she mocked was actually a carefully orchestrated step toward success. Every rejected proposal she ridiculed was a cover for major business. Deals. I used her network, her connections, watching as she inadvertently introduced me to people who would become key players in my company. Her friend Victoria, who would later become our marketing director, once spent an entire dinner party explaining basic marketing concepts to me, completely unaware that I was evaluating her for the position she would eventually hold. The real turning point came 3 years ago, when my supply chain management platform caught the attention of major industry players. While Rebecca attended charity galas and boasted about her own career achievements, I was secretly closing deals worth hundreds of millions. Every time she complained about supporting my expensive hobby, I was expanding Nexus's reach globally. I remembered the night she came home excited about her new job opportunity at Nexus Technologies. "Finally," she had said, "a chance to work with a real company." The irony was exquisite. She had no idea she was interviewing for a position in my company, nor that her entire department had been created specifically to maintain my cover. Through it all, I kept my father's words close to heart. He had been a small business owner in Oakland's Chinatown, working 18-hour days to give me an education. "Success isn't about making noise," he would say. "It's about building something so solid that no one can tear it down." When he passed away 2 years ago, Rebecca had complained about taking time off work to attend the funeral. "It's not like he was anybody important," she had said, not knowing that his small electronics shop had provided the seed money for what would become Nexus Technologies. That comment had sealed her fate. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about justice. Every laugh, every mockery, every dismissive comment since then had been carefully documented, added to the growing file that would eventually lead to this moment. Standing in our kitchen, now listening to the continued laughter from the living room, I felt a calm certainty. Tomorrow, when I finally revealed myself as the owner of Nexus Technologies, it wouldn't just be about exposing their incompetence or punishing their cruelty. It would be about showing them that true power doesn't need to announce itself. I checked my watch, 10:30 p.m. In less than 11 hours, everything would change. The termination papers were ready, the security teams briefed, and the board members notified of an emergency meeting. Soon, they would all learn what I had known for years. Sometimes the biggest power lies in being underestimated. Picking up the truffle platter, I straightened my shoulders and prepared to return to my role as the disappointing husband for one last time. Tomorrow, they would learn the truth. But tonight, I would let them enjoy their final moments of perceived superiority. I returned to the living room with the truffle platter, where the atmosphere had grown even more toxic. The combination of expensive wine and unchecked arrogance had removed what little filter my wife and her friends typically maintained. Rebecca sat perched on the arm of Victoria's chair, both of them scrolling through something on Victoria's phone, occasionally bursting into poorly suppressed giggles. "Oh my God, look at this one!" Victoria exclaimed, turning her phone to show the others. "James's LinkedIn profile. Can we talk about these entrepreneurial achievements he's listed?" She cleared her throat dramatically, preparing to read aloud. My jaw tightened imperceptibly. The LinkedIn profile was entirely fabricated, of course, part of my carefully constructed facade. Every failed venture, every exaggerated claim was meticulously crafted to maintain my cover while I built Nexus Technologies from the shadows. Innovative problem solver with a track record of identifying market opportunities, Victoria read, her voice dripping with mockery. Market opportunities. The only opportunity he's identified is marrying someone successful enough to support his delusions. Rebecca preened at the backhanded compliment, running her fingers through her expensively highlighted hair. Sometimes I wonder if he actually believes his own hype. Just last week, he was telling me about some revolutionary algorithm he's developed, something about supply chain optimization. I placed the truffles on the coffee table, my movements, deliberate and controlled. That algorithm was actually the cornerstone of Nexus's success, currently generating millions in revenue. The patent papers sat in my private safe, along with documentation of every snide comment and dismissive gesture I'd endured over the years. David, now visibly drunk, grabbed a truffle and leaned forward conspiratorially. "You know what I heard? Someone from his old company told me he was fired for trying to steal proprietary technology. Can you imagine? He couldn't even do corporate espionage right." The room erupted in laughter, but I caught the flash of something darker in Rebecca's eyes. "Really?" she said, her interest piqued. "He told me he left voluntarily to pursue his own ventures." She turned to me, her smile sharp as a blade. "Care to explain the discrepancy, darling?" I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, playing my part perfectly. "It was a misunderstanding," I mumbled, knowing this would only fuel their amusement. "I wasn't." "Wrong! A misunderstanding!" Claire exclaimed, nearly spilling her wine. "That's what my teenage son says when he gets caught sneaking out. At least he has the excuse of being 17. Victoria leaned back, crossing her legs with practiced elegance. "You know, Rebecca, I've never asked. How did you two even meet? I mean, you're so—" She gestured vaguely at Rebecca's designer outfit and perfectly manicured appearance. "And he's so—" "It was at a tech conference," Rebecca supplied, her tone suggesting she was sharing a particularly amusing anecdote. "He was working as a volunteer, if you can believe it, handing out name badges and setting up chairs. What Rebecca didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had specifically chosen that conference because I knew she would be there. I had already identified Nexus's future key players, and Rebecca's position at her previous company made her the perfect unwitting accomplice in my plan. I thought I could help him," Rebecca continued, her voice taking on a theatrical tone of martyrdom. "He seemed so earnest, so convinced he could be something. I suppose that's what I get for trying to save someone from themselves." David's wife, Sarah, who had been relatively quiet until now, chimed in. "It's not too late, you know, to start over. I mean, how long can you keep supporting someone who clearly isn't going to change?" I watched as Rebecca's expression shifted, something calculating entering her eyes. "Believe me," she said softly, "I've been thinking about that a lot lately." She shot me a look that was meant to wound. "There's only so long you can watch someone waste their potential before you have to admit they never had any to begin with." The room fell into a heavy silence, the kind that follows when a private thought has been voiced too publicly. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for a reaction, expecting me to defend myself or slink away in shame. Instead, I checked my watch. 11:15 p.m. "I think I'll head up to bed," I said quietly, playing the part of the defeated husband one. Last time. Big day tomorrow. This earned another round of snickers. They assumed I was referring to yet another doomed job interview or pitiful startup attempt. Rebecca waved her hand dismissively. Yes, yes, your mysterious morning meeting. Try not to embarrass yourself too much this time. More laughter followed. Me, as I stood. As I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, I could hear Victoria's voice carrying from below. Seriously, Rebecca, you're a saint. I don't know how you do it. If my husband was such a... well, you know... I closed the bedroom door. Behind me, finally allowing myself a small smile. In less than 10 hours, they would all understand exactly how Rebecca did it, by unknowingly living off the success of the very man they mocked. I walked to the window, looking out over the city skyline that housed the headquarters of my empire. Tomorrow their laughter would stop. Tomorrow they would learn that every luxury they enjoyed, every promotion they celebrated, every achievement they claimed, had been orchestrated by the man they thought was a failure. But for now, I had one last night of preparation ahead of me. I pulled out my phone and sent a final text to Sarah, my trusted executive assistant. Everything ready for tomorrow? Her response came immediately. All set. Security briefed. Board members notified. Files prepared. Perfect. In the quiet sanctuary of my home office, disguised as my hobby room, where Rebecca thought I spent hours playing with worthless startup ideas, I began my final preparations. The space looked deliberately messy, scattered papers, outdated programming books, and a whiteboard filled with amateurish business plans. It was all part of the facade, a carefully constructed image of failed ambition. Behind the false wall panel, however, sat my real workstation. 3 high-resolution monitors sprung to life as I entered my security code, displaying real-time data from Nexus Technologies' global operations. I pulled up the files I'd been meticulously compiling for years, each one a nail in the coffin of their careers. First was Victoria's file. As marketing director, she'd been embezzling company funds for months, disguising personal expenses as marketing research. 5-star hotels, luxury spa weekends, even her designer wardrobe, all charged to the company under cleverly coded expense. Reports. The forensic accounting team had documented everything, building an airtight case for termination. Playing with your little projects again? Rebecca's voice floated up from downstairs, followed by more laughter. I smiled faintly as I pulled up her friend's personnel file. David's transgressions were even more serious. As CFO, he'd been manipulating quarterly reports, inflating numbers to secure larger bonuses. What he didn't know was that every fraudulent entry had been flagged, every deceptive calculation documented. The SEC would be particularly interested in some of his creative accounting practices. I opened my secure email and sent final confirmations to the security team. Tomorrow, access cards would be deactivated, emails suspended, and personal belongings packed before they even arrived at the office. Everything had to be timed perfectly. Claire's husband, despite being newer to the company, had already managed to compromise himself. His attempts to sell company secrets to competitors had been monitored from day one. The evidence was damning. Recorded conversations, copied emails, documented meetings. His termination would be accompanied by legal action. A soft knock at the door made me quickly switch screens. "Come in," I called out, knowing it would be Rebecca. She entered with that familiar look of disdain, surveying what she thought was just another room full of failed dreams. "We're wrapping up downstairs," she said, leaning against the doorframe, "though I don't know why I'm telling you, since you're hiding up here as usual." Her words were slightly slurred from the wine, but her contempt remained sharp. I nodded, meekly playing my part. "Just finishing up some research." She laughed, high and cruel. "Research, right. You know, Victoria made an excellent point tonight. There comes a time when you have to stop chasing fantasies and face reality. If she only knew the reality that awaited her tomorrow. Behind her, on my hidden monitors, I could see the final pieces falling into place. The board members had confirmed their attendance for tomorrow's emergency meeting. Security protocols were set. Legal teams were standing by. "Maybe you're right," I said softly, watching her eyes narrow in surprise. She hadn't expected agreement. "Well," she said, somehow managing to make the single word drip with condescension, "miracles do happen. Try not to stay up all night with your little projects. Some of us have real work tomorrow." As she closed the door, I turned back to my preparations. I pulled up the final set of documents, the ones that would hit closest to home. Rebecca's own involvement in company misconduct was well documented. Her unauthorized sharing of confidential information, her abuse of expense accounts, and her harassment of junior staff members, all of it carefully recorded. But the most damning evidence had nothing to do with work. I opened a folder containing surveillance photos, text messages, and hotel receipts. Rebecca's carefully hidden affair with a senior executive at a competing firm had been documented for months. Every secret meeting, every encrypted message, every lie she told about working late, all of it preserved in high-resolution detail. I checked the time, 12:30 a.m. In less than 9 hours, their world would implode. I began the final system checks, ensuring every piece of evidence was properly backed up and accessible. The security team confirmed their positions for tomorrow. Legal had prepared individual packets for each termination, complete with non-disclosure, agreements, and clear documentation of cause. One by one, I reviewed their personnel files one last time. Victoria Martinez, Marketing Director, terminated for financial misconduct and misappropriation of company funds. David Thompson, CFO, terminated for securities fraud and falsification of financial records. Claire's husband, Michael Roberts, VP of Operations, terminated for corporate espionage and breach of contract. Rebecca Chen, Director of Client Relations, terminated for breach of confidentiality and ethical violations. Each termination had been carefully crafted to be both legally unassailable and professionally devastating. They wouldn't just lose their jobs, they would become unhirable in their fields. I sent one final email to my executive assistant: initiate Protocol Alpha at 8:45 a.m. No exceptions, no delays. Her response was immediate. Understood. All teams in position. Standing up from my desk, I took one last look at the evidence of their arrogance and cruelty. Years of mockery, condescension, and betrayal had led to this moment. Tomorrow, they would learn that the man they ridiculed had been watching, waiting, and building their downfall brick by brick. I shut down the hidden system and closed the false panel. Looking around at the deliberately messy hobby room, I allowed myself a moment of appreciation for the role I'd played. The scattered papers, the amateurish diagrams, the outdated technology, all of it had served its purpose perfectly. Tomorrow, the mask would finally come off, but tonight I had one last part to play. The defeated husband going to bed with another failure hanging over his head. If only they knew what kind of success awaited them in the morning. As I lay in bed beside Rebecca, listening to her steady breathing, I thought about how this would be the last night of our charade. She had come to bed without a word, turning her back to me, her usual way of showing disapproval. The designer, silk pajamas she wore, like everything else, had been bought with my money, though she believed they were the fruits of her own success. The digital clock on the nightstand showed 1:45 a.m. Sleep wouldn't come easily tonight, but that was fine. I had spent countless nights like this over the past 6 years, lying awake, playing every angle, building my empire from the shadows while maintaining the facade of mediocrity. My phone buzzed softly. Another update from Sarah, my executive assistant. Final security briefing complete. All teams in position for tomorrow. Lockdown protocols ready. I responded with a simple "confirmed" before deleting the exchange, a habit born from years of careful deception. Rebecca stirred beside me, murmuring something in her sleep. Even unconscious, she managed to sound condescending. The dinner party's events played through my mind, each mockery, each snide comment adding fuel to tomorrow's fire. But it was her final words of the evening that truly crystallized everything. I had overheard her in the kitchen, speaking to Victoria in what she thought was a private moment. "I've already talked to Andrew," she had said, referring to her divorce attorney. "He says with James's track record of failure, I could easily get everything. After all, what judge would believe he contributed anything to our lifestyle?" Victoria's response had been equally cruel. "Finally, honestly, Rebecca, you've wasted enough time on him. Though I have to admit, watching him fumble through life has been entertaining." "I'm filing the papers next week," Rebecca had continued, unaware that her every word was being recorded by the hidden security systems I had installed throughout the house. "I've already moved most of my money to a private account. Not that James would notice. He's too busy with his pathetic attempts at entrepreneurship." The irony was almost poetic. The private account she had mentioned was actually one of my shell companies, designed specifically to track her financial maneuvers. Every dollar she thought she was hiding was actually being monitored, documented, and added to the evidence that would be presented tomorrow. I turned to look at her sleeping form, remembering the day we met. Back then, I had seen her ambition as an asset, her social climbing as a tool I could use. I never expected to feel anything real for her, but somewhere along the way, I had hoped she might prove to be more than just a means to an end. That hope had died the day of my father's funeral, while I grieved the man who had sacrificed everything to give me an education. Rebecca had complained about missing an important networking event. "It's not like your father was anyone important," she had said, checking her makeup in the rear-view mirror. "Just a shopkeeper who couldn't think bigger than his little electronics store." She couldn't have known that her words would set in motion the final phase of my plan. That little electronics store had provided the seed money for what would become Nexus Technologies. My father's lessons about patience, about building something lasting, had shaped every decision I'd made. My phone buzzed again. Another message. This time from Building Security. Mrs. Chen's private meeting with Mr. Harrison from rival firm cancelled for tomorrow. So, she had planned to meet her lover, even on what would become the most significant day of our lives. The surveillance photos of their previous encounters would make an interesting addition to tomorrow's revelations. I got up quietly, walking to the window. The city sprawled out below, a maze of lights and shadows. Somewhere out there, Victoria, David, and the others were sleeping peacefully, unaware that their comfortable lives were about to implode. Their careers, their reputations, their carefully constructed facades, all of it would crumble in a matter of hours. Checking my watch again, 2:30 a.m., I moved to the ensuite bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. The man in the mirror looked tired, but his eyes held a steely determination. For years, I had maintained the image of a defeated dreamer, absorbing their ridicule with seemingly endless patience. That patience had run out. I returned to the bedroom, where Rebecca had shifted in her sleep, her expensive silk pajamas twisted around her. The same pajamas she had bought to celebrate her promotion, a promotion I had deliberately delayed to maintain our charade. Tomorrow she would learn the truth about every aspect of her life, her job, her marriage, her lover, her future. The final pieces were in place. The board members had been quietly briefed, the security teams positioned, and the evidence compiled. In just a few hours, the carefully constructed world of Rebecca and her friends would shatter, revealing the truth they had been too arrogant to see. I lay back down, my mind racing through the sequence of events to come. By this time tomorrow, everything would be different. The man they had mocked, belittled, and underestimated would be revealed as the architect of their downfall. As I finally drifted towards sleep, Rebecca's words from earlier echoed in my mind. Some of us have real work tomorrow. She had no idea just how real tomorrow's work would be. The time for hiding, for playing the fool, was almost over. The countdown to their reckoning had begun. The morning dawned crisp and clear, perfect for what was about to unfold. I woke at precisely 5:30 a.m. long before Rebecca would stir. In the walk-in closet, hidden behind my deliberately modest collection of off-the-rack suits, I retrieved the custom-tailored Tom Ford suit I'd been saving for this day. Dark navy, impeccably cut, the armor of a CEO, not the costume of a failure. Rebecca was still asleep when I emerged from the bathroom, fully dressed and groomed. I allowed myself a moment to study her sleeping form, mentally preparing for the shock that would soon replace her usual smug expression. The diamond tennis bracelet she wore to bed, another gift she attributed to her own success, caught the early morning light. "Going somewhere?" Her groggy voice startled me. She propped herself up on one elbow, eyeing my attire with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "Another big meeting?" "Something like that," I replied softly, adjusting my platinum cufflinks, accessories I'd kept hidden away until now. She sat up fully, her brow furrowing. Is that a new suit?" The confusion in her voice was evident. In her mind, I couldn't afford designer clothing. "I've had it for a while," I said truthfully, "just waiting for the right moment." Rebecca's laugh was sharp, cutting through the morning quiet. "The right moment? James, it's barely 6 a.m. What could possibly be so important that you're dressed like—" She gestured vaguely at my appearance. "This? You'll find out soon enough," I replied, checking my phone. Sarah had already sent the morning briefing. "All systems go, security in position, board members arriving early as requested." "Whatever," Rebecca sighed, reaching for her own phone. "Just try not to embarrass yourself too badly. I have enough to deal with today without having to manage your latest crisis." If she only knew what kind of crisis awaited her. I left the bedroom without another word, descending to the kitchen, where I prepared a cup of coffee, not the cheap brand I usually drank to maintain appearances, but the premium reserve I kept hidden behind it. At 6:30 a.m. sharp, my private driver pulled up outside our building. Not the Uber Rebecca assumed I used, but James, my longtime employee who had played along with the charade for years. The sleek black Mercedes S-Class waited discreetly in the private garage, a far cry from the rideshare vehicles I normally pretended to take. "Good morning, Mr. Chen," James said professionally as I settled into the back seat. "Everything is prepared at the office." The drive to Nexus Technologies headquarters was quiet, giving me time to review the morning's carefully orchestrated sequence of events. Security teams were already in place, access cards had been selectively deactivated, and the board members were gathering in the private conference room on the top floor. We pulled into the private underground parking garage, level Rebecca and her friends didn't even know existed. Sarah was waiting by the private elevator, tablet in hand, her usual efficient self. "Good morning, sir," she said, falling into step beside me. Victoria arrived early, as expected. She's in her office preparing for what she thinks is her promotion. "Announcement." I nodded, a faint smile playing at my lips. "And the others?" David just pulled in, looking rather hungover from last night. "Claire's husband is already in his office, and we've confirmed Rebecca has just left your apartment." The private elevator whisked us to the executive floor. Through the glass walls, I could see Victoria in her office, practically preening as she prepared for her imaginary promotion. She had already sent out subtle hints to her team about her upcoming advancement. "Security teams are in position," Sarah continued as we walked. HR has the termination packets ready and legal is standing by. The board members are waiting in the main conference room. I checked my watch. 7:45 a.m. Right on schedule. Sir. Sarah hesitated for a moment. Rebecca just texted Victoria about meeting for coffee before work. Should we let them? I replied. It's fitting they should have one last moment of perceived triumph before everything changes. I spent the next hour in my private office, a space none of them knew existed, reviewing the final documentation. Each termination packet was meticulous, containing irrefutable evidence of their misconduct. Victoria's embezzlement, David's fraud, the leaked corporate secrets, Rebecca's indiscretions, all of it carefully documented and legally verified. At 8:55 a.m., Sarah's voice came through the intercom. Sir, they're all here. Victoria and Rebecca are having coffee in the break room. David is nursing a hangover in his office, and Claire's husband is on a call he thinks is confidential. Perfect, I replied. Initiate lockdown protocols. No one enters or leaves without authorization. I stood, straightening my tie and buttoning my suit jacket. Years of preparation had led to this moment. Through the one-way glass of my office, I could see them all going about their morning routines, completely unaware that their world was about to shatter. Send security to escort them to the main conference room, I instructed Sarah. It's time. As I watched the security teams move into position, I thought about every snide comment, every mockery, every moment of humiliation I had endured. The mask of mediocrity I had worn for so long was about to come off, and the revelation would be spectacular. The clock struck 9 a.m. Showtime. The main conference room at Nexus Technologies was an impressive space with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. Now at 9:05 a.m., it was about to become the stage for their downfall. Through the one-way glass of my private observation room, I watched as security teams professionally but firmly escorted my soon-to-be former executives inside. Victoria entered. First, her initial confidence faltering as she noticed the security detail. Her designer heels clicked against the marble floor, the sound sharp and nervous. What's going on? I have a team meeting scheduled. Rebecca followed, her face flushed with anger at being manhandled by security. Do you know who I am? I demand to speak to whoever's in charge of this ridiculous situation. David stumbled in, looking worse for wear, his hungover state making him more disheveled than usual. Claire's husband, Michael, brought up the rear, already sweating through his expensive shirt. They all took seats around the massive conference table, exchanging confused and increasingly worried glances. This is outrageous, Victoria announced to the room. I'm supposed to be in a promotion meeting right now. Where is HR? Where is the board? Sarah entered silently, distributing sealed folders in front of each of them. Her face remained professionally neutral, though I knew she'd been looking forward to this moment almost as much as I had. What's this? David asked, reaching for his folder with trembling hands. Before anyone could open them, the door opened one final time. I stepped into the room. The silence was immediate and absolute. 4 pairs of eyes widened in recognition and disbelief. Rebecca's mouth fell open, her perfectly applied lipstick suddenly looking garish against her rapidly paling face. Good morning, I said calmly, moving to stand at the head of the table. Please don't open those folders just yet. We have a few matters to discuss first. James? Rebecca's voice cracked. What is this? What are you doing here? I smiled, not the meek smile they were used to, but the confident expression of a CEO about to clean house. I'm exactly where I belong, Rebecca. In my company, addressing my employees. Well, soon-to-be former employees. Victoria let out a sharp laugh, though it held a note of hysteria. Your company? This is insane. You can't possibly. Nexus Technologies, I cut her off smoothly, was founded by me 6 years ago. Every division, every project, every success you've claimed as your own was orchestrated by me. While you were all busy mocking my supposed failures, I was building this empire from the shadows. I pressed a button on the remote in my hand, and the wall behind me came to life with multiple screens. Each displayed damning evidence of their individual misdeeds. Victoria Martinez, I began, watching her face drain of color as spreadsheets detailed her embezzlement appeared on screen. Over the past 2 years, you've stolen approximately $847,000 through falsified marketing expenses. Those spa weekends and designer shopping sprees weren't as well hidden as you thought. She opened her mouth to protest, but I was already moving on. David Thompson, creative accounting is one thing, but outright fraud. The SEC will be particularly interested in how you've been manipulating our quarterly reports. David slumped in his chair, his hangover forgotten in the face of his career's implosion. Michael Roberts, I turned to Claire's husband, who was now openly sweating. Selling corporate secrets to our competitors. Did you really think our security systems wouldn't catch those late-night emails, those encrypted messages? Finally, I turned to Rebecca, who sat rigid in her chair, her knuckles white against the armrests. And you, Rebecca, where should I begin? The unauthorized sharing of confidential information, the abuse of company resources, or perhaps we should discuss your afternoon meetings with Thomas Harrison from our biggest competitor. The blood drained from her face. How did you know? I finished for her. I know everything, every mock, every insult, every betrayal. While you were all laughing at my supposed failures, I was documenting your actual ones. I gestured to the folders in front of them. Inside these packets, you'll find your termination papers, along with comprehensive evidence of your misconduct. You're all being terminated for cause, effective immediately. Security will escort you to HR for processing, and then off the premises. Victoria found her voice first, though it shook with rage and fear. You can't do this. The board would never— The board, I interrupted, has already approved these terminations. In fact, they're watching this meeting via video conference. I gestured to another screen where the stern faces of board members were visible, watching the proceedings with grave expressions. This is a joke, Rebecca stammered, though her voice held a note of desperation. It has to be. You're nothing. You're nobody. You couldn't even what, Rebecca? Build a successful company, manage a global enterprise, lead an organization. While you were busy playing the role of the long-suffering wife, I was building something you couldn't even comprehend. Every luxury you've enjoyed, every achievement you've claimed, it all came from the man you thought was a failure. The room fell into stunned silence. Through the windows, the morning sun illuminated their shocked faces, casting harsh shadows on their crumbling world. Security will now escort you to HR, I announced, pressing another button. The conference room doors opened, and security teams entered. Your access cards have been deactivated, your emails suspended, and your personal belongings will be shipped to you after a thorough audit. As they were led out one by one, I caught Rebecca's final glance, a mixture of horror, disbelief, and dawning comprehension. The woman who had spent years mocking my failures was finally seeing me for who I really was, and it was breaking her. As the others were escorted out, I held up my hand to stop the security team from leading Rebecca away. Mrs. Chen will stay. We have personal matters to discuss. The guards nodded and closed the door, leaving me alone. With my wife for our final confrontation, Rebecca stood by the conference table, her usual poise shattered. Her perfectly manicured hands gripped the back of a chair, knuckles white with tension. The morning sun streaming through the floor to ceiling. Windows cast harsh shadows across her face, highlighting the mix of fury and fear in her expression. How long? She finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. How long have you been lying to me? I moved to stand by the window, looking out over the city I secretly owned. Lying? Interesting choice of words, Rebecca. I simply let you see what you wanted to see. You were so convinced of my inadequacy that you never bothered to look deeper. This is insane, she said, her voice rising. You can't expect me to believe that you, the same man who couldn't even what? I turned to face her. Land a job, secure an investment, build something successful. Tell me, Rebecca, in all our years together, did you ever once ask me about my dreams beyond mocking them? Did you ever show genuine interest in anything I was doing? She took a step back, thrown by the steel in my voice, a tone she'd never heard from me before. I supported you. I paid for everything. While you chased your ridiculous... You paid for nothing, I cut her off sharply. Every dollar you spent, every luxury you flaunted, every achievement you claimed, it all came from me. That promotion you're so proud of? I created that position specifically to maintain my cover. The department you run. I established it knowing you'd be perfect for the role, ambitious enough to seem successful, but not curious enough to dig deeper. The color drained from her face as the implications began to sink in. The house, she whispered, paid for in cash through one of my holding companies, I confirmed. The cars, the vacations, the jewelry, all of it funded by the man you loved to ridicule. Even that private account you've been squirreling money away in, planning for your divorce, it's monitored by my financial team. She stumbled slightly, catching herself against the conference table. Why would you do this? Originally, because I needed someone whose ambition and social climbing could help me build the right connections while staying in the shadows. Your network of corporate climbers became my perfect cover. I paused, watching the realization dawn in her eyes. But then you showed me who you really were. I pressed a button on my phone, and her voice filled the room from a recorded conversation. It's not like your father was anyone important, just a shopkeeper who couldn't think bigger than his little electronics store. Rebecca flinched at her own words. James, that little electronics store provided the seed money for what became Nexus Technologies, I continued, my voice cold. While you were mocking my father's funeral, you were standing in a building his sacrifice helped build. That was the day I knew this marriage would end exactly like this. Tears began to well in her eyes, but I knew they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of humiliation and rage. So all of this was just revenge? You married me just to, what, teach me a lesson? No, Rebecca. I married you because I saw an opportunity. You were so perfect, ambitious, social, completely self-absorbed. You never questioned where the money really came from because you were too busy taking credit for it. Your friends never looked deeper because they were too busy following your lead. I walked to the conference table and opened a new folder, spreading out papers across its polished surface. But let's talk about your own misconduct. The confidential information you've been sharing with Thomas Harrison, for instance. She froze. What? Your lover? I clarified, watching her face pale further. Did you really think those hotel meetings were secret? That those encrypted messages were secure? I knew about every rendezvous, every conversation, every plan you made. You had me followed? Her voice shook with indignation. I had everyone followed. It's my company, Rebecca. Nothing happens here without my knowledge. I gestured to the papers on the table. These are divorce papers. You'll find the terms quite clear. You leave with nothing except what you brought into the marriage, which, as we both know, was nothing. You can't do this, she whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. I'll fight it. I'll tell everyone. Tell them what? I asked calmly. That your unemployed husband turns out to be the CEO of a global technology company. That while you were mocking his failures, he was building an empire. That every luxury you claimed credit for was actually provided by the man you belittled. Go ahead. I'm sure it will make fascinating headlines." She slumped into a chair, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. "Why now? Why reveal all this today? Because the time for hiding is over. Nexus Technologies is about to go public, and I'm done playing the role of the failing husband. You and your friends served your purpose, providing the perfect cover, while I built something lasting, but now I straighten my tie. Now it's time for the truth." Security knocked on the door, right on schedule. "Mr. Chen, the press is waiting in the main lobby for the announcement." "Thank you," I replied, gathering my papers. Mrs. Chen was just leaving. I turned to Rebecca one last time. "Security will escort you out. Your personal belongings will be sent to your sister's house. Yes, I know that's where you've been planning to stay after filing for divorce. The irony is rather poetic, don't you think?" As she was led away, I caught my reflection in the window. No longer the meek, unsuccessful husband, but the CEO I had always been. It was time to show the world who James Chen really was. The press conference was a carefully orchestrated revelation. Standing at the podium in the main lobby of Nexus Technologies, I faced a sea of cameras and bewildered faces. The story had already begun spreading through the building like wildfire. The supposedly unsuccessful husband of Rebecca Chen was actually the founder and CEO. "For 6 years," I began, my voice steady and confident, "I've built Nexus Technologies from the shadows, creating a company that has revolutionized supply chain management and digital transformation. Today, as we prepare for our public offering, it's time to step into the light." Reporters' hands shot up immediately, questions flying from all directions. The story was irresistible, a secret billionaire who had masqueraded as a failure while building a tech empire. In the back of the room, I could see some of my now former executives being escorted out, their faces ashen. "Mr. Chen, is it true that your own wife didn't know you owned the company?" "Yes," I replied simply. "Very few people knew my true identity. It was a strategic decision that allowed me to build Nexus without the distractions of public attention." Victoria was the last to leave, her designer handbag clutched to her chest like a shield. Our eyes met briefly across the lobby. The woman, who had offered me an entry-level mailroom position just yesterday, now understood the full magnitude of her mistake. "Can you comment on the executive changes announced this morning?" "Nexus Technologies is entering a new phase," I answered diplomatically. "As we prepare for our IPO, we're making necessary leadership adjustments to ensure the company's continued success." Sarah appeared at my side, tablet in hand. "Sir, the board would like to meet with you after the press conference, and the SEC representatives have arrived to discuss the IPO timeline." I nodded, scanning the room one final time. The employees gathered around the edges watched with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Many of them had seen me in the building before, assuming I was just another unsuccessful job applicant or low-level contractor. "One last question," called out a reporter from the Financial Times. "What made you decide to maintain this deception for so long?" I paused, considering my words carefully. Success isn't always about who shouts the loudest. Sometimes the most powerful position is the one nobody sees coming. As the press conference concluded, I made my way back to my office, no longer hidden, but now prominently located on the top floor. The nameplate on the door read, "James Chen, CEO," in elegant brushed steel. Inside, the views of the city seemed different somehow, clearer now that I no longer had to hide who I was. Sarah followed me in, closing the door behind her. "The termination proceedings are complete. All access has been revoked, and their personal items are being packed under supervision." And Rebecca? She tried to access her private account before leaving. When she realized it had been frozen, Sarah paused, a slight smile playing at her lips. She didn't take it well. I nodded, turning to look out over the city. Below, I could see David being escorted to his car, his hungover swagger replaced by defeated slouch. Victoria was already gone, probably calling every contact in her network, only to find that her reputation was already in tatters. "Sir," Sarah hesitated, "there's something else. Rebecca's friend Claire is in the lobby, demanding to speak with you. She claims she had no idea about her husband's corporate espionage." "Of course she didn't," I replied. "She was too busy offering me warehouse jobs to notice her husband was selling company secrets. The morning's events had sent shockwaves through the corporate world. My phone was flooded with messages from business leaders, investors, and media outlets, all wanting to know more about the secret billionaire who had hidden in plain sight. "The board is waiting," Sarah reminded me gently. I straightened my tie, ready to face the next challenge. The masks were off now, and there was work to be done. As I headed to the boardroom, employees stopped to stare, finally seeing me for who I really was. The whispers followed me down the corridor, not of mockery this time, but of respect tinged with fear. The immediate aftermath of my revelation was exactly as I had planned: swift, complete, and irreversible. The people who had spent years underestimating me now understood their mistake, but it was too late. I had built something they couldn't touch, couldn't diminish, couldn't mock, and this was just the beginning. 6 months had passed since the morning that shook Nexus Technologies to its core. The company's IPO had been an unprecedented success, with stock prices soaring beyond even the most optimistic projections. The world, it seemed, was fascinated by both the company's technological innovations and the story of its secret CEO. Standing in my office on the top floor, I looked out at the transformed landscape of Nexus Technologies. The toxic culture that Victoria, David, and the others had fostered was gone, replaced by an environment of genuine innovation and collaboration. Employee satisfaction scores had risen by 78%, and productivity had reached all-time highs. Sarah entered with the morning briefing, her role now expanded to Chief of Staff. "The quarterly reports are in," she announced, a hint of pride in her voice. "Revenue is up 85% since the changes. The new executive team has exceeded all expectations." I nodded, scanning the documents. After the mass terminations, I had promoted from within, elevating employees who had shown genuine talent and integrity despite the previous management's obstacles. People like Marcus Zhang, a brilliant engineer who Victoria had repeatedly sidelined, now led our innovation department with remarkable success. "And what of our former executives?" I asked, though I already knew the answers. Victoria attempted to start her own marketing consultancy, but her reputation preceded her. "No major company will touch her," Sarah continued. "David is facing SEC investigations, and Michael Roberts has been blacklisted from the industry due to the corporate espionage charges." "And Rebecca?" Sarah's lips curled slightly. "Still living with her sister. The divorce was finalized last month. Her attempt to contest the prenup failed spectacularly, especially after the evidence of her affair became public record. Thomas Harrison was fired from his company once their corporate espionage connection came to light. The karmic justice was almost poetic. The same people who had once mockingly offered me entry-level positions now couldn't even secure jobs for themselves. But the most significant changes were within Nexus itself. The company had transformed from a successful but conventionally run corporation into a genuine industry leader. Our new transparency initiatives had become the gold standard. In tech governance, the mentorship program I established had already launched dozens of promising careers. "The Second Chance program has been particularly successful," Sarah noted, referring to our initiative to rehire employees who had left due to the previous management's toxic behavior. Janet Moore, who quit after Victoria sabotaged her projects, is now heading our European division. The press had dubbed it the Nexus Revolution, a complete reimagining of corporate culture. Business schools were already writing case studies about the transformation. But for me, the real success was in the smaller moments, seeing employees excited to come to work, watching innovations flourish without office politics getting in the way, hearing genuine laughter in the break room instead of cruel mockery. The charitable foundation is ready to launch, Sarah added, pulling up another report. Your father's name will be on the scholarship program for young entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds. This was perhaps the sweetest victory of all. The James Chen Senior Foundation would provide opportunities to brilliant minds who, like my father, had big dreams but limited resources. Each scholarship would cover not just education, but also seed money for startups. There's one more thing, Sarah said, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. Claire came by again. She's looking for any position, said she'd even work in the mailroom. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Make sure she receives the same form letter we send all other applicants, I replied. We'll keep your resume on file. Looking out over the city skyline, I reflected on how much had changed. The secret CEO was now a regular on business magazine covers, but the power hadn't come from the revelation. It had come from the years of patient building, of quiet determination, of letting others underestimate me while I constructed something unshakable. The board meeting starts in 10 minutes, Sarah reminded me. They're eager to discuss the expansion plans. I straightened my tie, no longer playing a role, but simply being myself. The path forward was clear now, unobstructed by pretense or deception. Nexus Technologies wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, proving that success built on genuine innovation and integrity would always outlast success built on arrogance and cruelty. As I headed to the boardroom, I passed the wall of newly installed company values. At the top, in bold letters, was the phrase that had guided me through all those years of hiding. True power isn't in what you show, it's in what you build. The long-term impact of that revealing morning had exceeded even my expectations. It wasn't just about personal vindication anymore. It was about creating something lasting, something my father would have been proud of. The man they had mocked hadn't just revealed his power, he had transformed an entire industry. 1 year after the revelation that changed everything, I stood in the renovated lobby of Nexus Technologies, preparing to unveil our latest innovation. The company had not just survived the upheaval, it had flourished beyond all expectations, but more importantly, it had become the kind of company my father would have admired, one built on integrity, innovation, and genuine value. As I adjusted my tie before the presentation, I caught my reflection in the glass. No longer playing a role, no longer hiding behind a carefully constructed facade. The lessons of the past year had crystallized into something profound, something worth sharing with the world. Sarah approached with the final presentation notes, but her usual professional demeanor softened. "Have you seen this morning's Wall Street Journal?" she asked, handing me the paper. The headline read, "Nexus Technologies named Most Innovative Company of the Year, the Revolutionary Leadership of James Chen." I smiled, remembering a very different headline from a year ago. Secret billionaire CEO reveals identity, transforms tech industry. The media had been obsessed with the dramatic reveal, but they'd missed the real story. It wasn't about the deception or even the revenge. It was about the power of patient building, of quiet determination. "I ran into Rebecca last week," Sarah mentioned carefully. "She was at a small startup's recruitment event, trying to rebuild her career. She looked different, humbled maybe." I nodded, feeling neither satisfaction nor regret. "And the others?" "Victoria's. Consulting business failed within months. David's legal troubles continue. Michael Roberts is working entry-level IT support in another state. Sarah paused. They all tried to sell their stories to the media, but no one's interested anymore. The world has moved on. And so had I. The past year had taught me that true success isn't measured in moments of triumph over others, but in creating something meaningful that outlasts personal victories. Nexus Technologies had become more than just my revenge vehicle. It was a testament to what could be built when power was wielded with purpose rather than pride. Walking toward the auditorium where employees and press waited, I passed the wall where we'd mounted my father's old store sign. Below it was his favorite saying, "Success isn't about being seen, it's about seeing clearly." How right he had been. The company's transformation hadn't just been about removing toxic leadership. It had been about fostering an environment where innovation thrived because people felt valued. The same employees who had once walked on eggshells now confidently pitched ideas that were revolutionizing our industry. "It's time, sir," Sarah said softly. Before stepping onto the stage, I thought about all those dinners where I'd sat quietly, absorbing their mockery. The patience that they had mistaken for weakness had been my greatest strength. While they focused on appearing powerful, I had focused on building power. While they chased validation, I had pursued vision. The auditorium was packed. Faces both familiar and new turned expectantly toward the stage. These weren't just employees anymore. They were partners in building something extraordinary. The culture of fear and manipulation that Rebecca and her friends had fostered was gone, replaced by genuine collaboration and innovation. Success, I began my speech, isn't about who you appear to be. It's about who you truly are and what you choose to build. The words carried the weight of experience, of lessons learned through years of careful planning and patient execution. Looking out over the crowd, I saw the truth that Rebecca and her friends had never understood. Real power doesn't need to announce itself. It builds quietly, grows steadily, and reveals itself not through words but through impact. The man they had mocked hadn't just been hiding his success. He had been learning the most valuable lesson of all, that true victory isn't in the moment of revelation, but in the legacy you create. Nexus Technologies wasn't just my revenge. It had become my redemption, my father's vindication, and a testament to the power of patient, purposeful building. As I concluded my speech and the audience rose in applause, I knew that the story of the secret CEO would fade, but what we had built would endure. In the end, that was the greatest revenge of all. Not the destruction of those who had wronged me, but the creation of something they could never diminish or deny. The power had never been in the secret I kept, but in the truth I had always known. Success built on integrity, however quiet, will always outlast success built on arrogance, however loud. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.